On just about every version of Minecraft, there is a void, and if you are to fall in that void for a few seconds, you will end up taking damage infinitely and inevitably die. On Legacy Console editions of Minecraft, there is a setting to set yourself invisible. Enabling this setting will alert you that you are invisible and invulnerable. With this setting enabled, if you are to fall in the void, you will not end up taking damage at all forever. You will continue to fall in the void until well, does anything happen? If you are to leave yourself falling in the void for, let's say, a few hours, maybe a day or a week, would anything happen? Would anything change visually or audibly? Would the game just break entirely at some point? You've probably seen SPD's video on how deep the void is on Minecraft Java Edition. If you haven't watched it, I recommend you do. However, the void on Legacy Console editions are probably not as interesting and complicated as the void on Java Edition, but there's a lot I have to say about the void here on Legacy Console editions, something so simplistic that will most likely make this video more odd and complex than SPD's video. Before going in depth with the void, no pun intended, I should probably clarify that Minecraft Java Edition mainly runs as a 64-bit game, as Legacy Console Editions runs as a 32-bit game. If you're not familiar with the terms 32-bit and 64-bit, they refer to processor architectures that determine how number values and data are stored and processed. This will be important soon. With that out of the way, I will be focusing on the Xbox 360 edition of Minecraft instead of every other Legacy Console edition, mainly because I don't have any other consoles to test this on. The general concept of the void in Minecraft is nullified, especially on Legacy Console editions of Minecraft, where accessing the void is a lot more ambitious than simply being able to type not even a sentence-long command on other editions of Minecraft like Java or Bedrock. And once you reach that point where you begin falling in the void endlessly, what now? There's nothing to be offered in this void. There's nothing around you, whether you look up or down, and there's nothing to see but this grainy purple void that no matter where you look will forever be all you see. A seamlessly infinite void, yet it's entirely empty. The taboo feeling of turning on a really old console, launching a game for the sole purpose of falling in its void. Something at most hundreds of players have most likely thought about for just a moment out of hundreds of millions of other players that never bothered with something this pointless, and I was one of those players that have thought about this pointless void. Growing up, I was always amused by meaningless things that were a complete waste of time, and still am to this day. Nearly 8 years ago, in March of 2017, a certain set of events came together that ultimately led me to have the idea of falling in the void and creating this very video you are watching right now. I won't go over most of my progression of me falling in the void over the years back then because there just isn't anything valuable enough worth mentioning. I should move on now to the more important part of this video. The terminal velocity in Minecraft is 78.4 blocks a second, meaning you would fall 4,704 blocks deeper into the void every minute, 282,240 blocks every hour, and over 6.7 million blocks every day. If you wanted to fall 1 billion blocks deep into the void, assuming it even ends at that point, it would take you nearly 5 months to reach that point. As extreme as that sounds, it's highly possible to reach such a point, and that's exactly what I did. My former goal wasn't actually trying to fall 1 billion blocks in the void, it was 2,147,483,648. Near the beginning of this video, I stated that Legacy Console editions of Minecraft mainly run as a 32-bit game and that the term 32-bit stores and processes number values and data. When it comes to number values in 32-bit games, the biggest number you can store is 2,147,483,647, and the smallest number you can technically store is negative 2,147,483,648. This overall range is about 4.3 billion numbers, or 2 to the power of 32. 64-bit games follow the same criteria, however, the biggest and smallest number you can store is over 9 quintillion, but 64-bit overall isn't important right now. The main goal was to reach over 2.1 billion blocks deep into the void, which would take over 10.5 months. Obviously, I never paid too much attention to the void when I had it running in the background over the years because there was nothing to exactly do. Within the course of mainly 2 years, August 2018 to August 2020, I had fallen 1 billion blocks deep into the void, and to my surprise, nothing changed. Sure, the coordinates on the map was something peculiar that no one had seen before, but you'd think after falling in the void for nearly 5 months, something in the slightest would change visually or audibly, yet it didn't. About 2 weeks had passed after I fell a billion blocks deep in the void, and I noticed my Xbox had crashed entirely. I assumed it was on for so long that it just temporarily gave out at one point. I reloaded the world, falling in the void again, but an hour or two later, my Xbox fully crashed again. Something was wrong at that point. I noticed how deep I was in the void and noticed I was just about halfway there to reaching the goal I had wanted for years, 2.1 billion. Part of me realized sooner or later, over 100 blocks after reaching the halfway point to 2.1 billion, everything crashes. You can try moving around or even going to the Xbox dashboard, but nothing would happen. I attempted to find some sort of way to pass this crashing point, but to no avail. I eventually gave up and would rarely attempt to pass it again almost every year, but I never could. Specifically, this point in the void would crash your console no matter what, and there wasn't even a proper reason why it would crash here. So that was it, right? Is the end of the void technically 1,073,741,951 blocks deep? Later in April of 2024, I installed Xenia, which is an emulator for the Xbox 360. I decided to set up Minecraft and fall in the void again. However, with Xenia, you are able to speed any game up around at most 20 times faster. Applying this timescale to the void, you could reach the crashing point within over a week instead of over 5 months. Around early May, I had reached the crashing point, and to nobody's surprise, the game crashed on Xenia too. This time with a crash dump containing some contents of memory the moment the game crashed. Now, I myself am not good with crash dumps or any of this, but by the looks of it and what I've gathered, you can notice the position I crashed at looking at a few floating points. You can also notice the just about infinite and NaN floating points as well. So what is this all representing and how does this happen? And I don't really have an exact answer to this. It's possible that depending on what your player's speed is traveling at this crash point, you could possibly avoid the crash entirely. I may be wrong on this, of course, because again, I have no idea what I'm looking at here, but this is what I seem to be getting from it. There is, however, another possible answer where if you check your exact coordinates, you'll notice a very accurate position of where the player is along with many decimal points. The bigger this number itself gets, the less accurate the position the player is at decimal-wise. It's possible that the game attempts to set you to a position resulting you in getting snapped somewhere the game didn't intend because of the limited decimal points, and everything ends up crashing because the game thinks the player is at an intended position, but the player ends up in a different position, if that makes any sense. So how is this information exactly useful to pass the crashing point? Elytra. Falling in the void is simple. You fall at a constant rate asymptotically and can slowly move around. As for gliding with an elytra, you have full control over your movement in every way possible. You can fall and swiftly move around, or slowly fall while swiftly moving around. If you do this while attempting to pass the crash point, it works. After over 3.5 years of thinking the void actually had some kind of end you couldn't pass, I was wrong. I was able to pass the crash point on both Xenia and my Xbox, and I continued on with falling in the void on my Xbox. As for Xenia, we'll get back to that later. I continued to fall into the void on my Xbox until 19 days later when my Xbox crashed again. And not because it was on for so long, which I'm surprised my Xbox still works to this day, but because there was another crash point. It was the same crash point as before, just at a completely different coordinate, 1.2 billion. Like the first crash point, I was able to pass it again. About 13 days later, my Xbox crashed again. There were actually quite a few crash points after passing the halfway point to 2.1 billion, specifically 8 crash points. These being the coordinates for each crash point. The first crash point coordinates make sense. It's right around the halfway point to 2.1 billion. As for the other coordinates, they all seem quite random. And they are, aside from the fact they are all being around a certain percentage of the way to 2.1 billion, such as 1.2 billion being 56% of 2.1 billion, and 1.7 billion being 80% of 2.1 billion. It's still pretty much unknown exactly why these coordinates in specific crash the game, but eventually on October 12th, 2024, this would be the day I reached the 32-bit integer limit. Will the game crash again around this point? If so, will I even be able to pass it? I recorded for over half an hour before reaching the goal I had originally wanted to reach 6 years ago, and here it is. There it is. Oh my god. Upon reaching the 32-bit integer limit, the coordinates on the map finally come to rest. You can go lower than 2.1 billion, however, the game can't register the number on the map's coordinates because it is too big. So after falling in the void for almost 10.5 months, the only thing that actually changes or new happens is the Y coordinate capping at over 2.1 billion. So what's after this? Let's go back to Xenia. When I continued falling in the void on my Xbox after passing the first crash point, I also continued falling in the void on Xenia, and because you can heavily speed any game up on Xenia, I was bound to reach the 32-bit integer limit on Xenia way before my Xbox, and that was the case. I had already known what was going to happen when I reached the 32-bit integer limit on my Xbox because I reached that same point on Xenia 5 months prior, and I also know everything else about the void. Using this tool named MCC Tool Chest allows you to modify anything on any Minecraft world on Xbox 360, including the player's position. To test this, I set my player position to something random like 120 million blocks deep into the void, and upon loading the world, it actually worked. I set my position right before the 32-bit integer limit, it worked. I could set my player position to any number without having to wait to reach that point. Remember how I mentioned the biggest number you can store in 64-bit games is over 9 quintillion? Falling over 9.2 quintillion blocks deep into the void without speeding the game up at all would take over 3.7 billion years. Even if you use Xenia to speed up the game, it would take over 100 million years. Let's say you do reach the 64-bit integer limit after millions of billions of years. What changes in the void? Nothing. The audio isn't any different, the visuals and Void skybox isn't any different than what it always has been before. The point of passing the 32-bit integer limit and the 64-bit integer limit is the exact same thing. There is no difference between reaching either of those points. So I thought, why not rip the band-aid off and set my player's position to the lowest possible number value it'll let me enter, that being 1e plus 308, which is this number right here. This number is so astronomically large that the definition astronomically doesn't even come close to describing this number value. If you had to reach the 64-bit integer limit in the void as many times as every atom in the observable universe, you would be nowhere close to even being a millionth of the way to reaching this number value, even if the game was sped up. And does anything even change in the void at this point? No. Trust me, I was a bit disappointed too, but then again, nobody was meant to see or reach this point, and I think reaching the 32-bit integer limit in the void legitimately is crazy enough. This was all done on the current version of Minecraft Xbox 360 Edition, which hasn't been updated in nearly 6 years, so it's not like anything in the void will ever change or update. However, I did go back to a much older version of Minecraft Xbox 360 Edition when the end dimension was first added to see if anything was different, and it very much was different. The font on the map's coordinates were different, and you could also horizontally expand further out in the void than in the current version. Because of this, the coordinates overall will get to a point where they display off the map and eventually disappear. Surprisingly, there were no crash points in the void on this version. Nothing happens upon passing them, and you continue to fall. However, when you reach the 32-bit integer limit, instead of the coordinates resting at 2.1 billion and being able to fall deeper, the game literally just crashes. That's it. There's no way to pass it. And if you try setting your player's position lower than 2.1 billion using MCC Tool Chest, the world will forever attempt to load. Some people may come to the conclusion and say that this is the end or bottom of the void, and some people may say the opposite. There are a couple notes I forgot to mention on the current version of Minecraft Xbox 360 Edition. If you are to set the player's position to nan, or not a number, it would actually accept that value, and upon loading the world, nothing would change aside from the Ender Dragon's health bar appearing, which is very strange considering the Ender Dragon's health bar doesn't display if you are hundreds of blocks away from the Ender Dragon or more. Setting the player's position in the void will actually work in the overworld and nether dimension as well. As much as it is way more difficult or even impossible to access the void in the overworld or nether compared to the end dimension on the Xbox 360 edition, the overworld and nether dimension's void acts the exact same as the end dimension's void. Same crash points, same integer limit coordinates, and so on. And that's about all I have to say about the void here, at least for the Xbox 360 edition of this game. I say this because someone else out there decided to fall in the void for a few hours on the PlayStation edition of Minecraft, and upon reaching 900,000 blocks deep into the void, you actually hit an invisible floor where you can't fall any further after 900,000 blocks, perhaps being an actual end or bottom to the void on PlayStation edition. But what's stopping you from just setting your position lower than 900,000 blocks using third-party tools? It's still very weird that this isn't applied to the Xbox 360 edition or possibly every other legacy console edition of Minecraft. Again, I don't have other consoles to test this on, such as the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, every other PlayStation edition, and Wii U. Though I imagine someone out there would be willing to bother going through the process of what I did on my Xbox 360 on a different console. And it'd be interesting to see if the Void is different on other console editions of Minecraft. And it probably is, which is very eerie to me. This Void has such a weird connection to me. Over the years, I've had many dreams about the Void, whether it was about me actually reaching some kind of bottom, or seeing random terrain generate exactly 50 million blocks deep in the Void that I just fall through, or times where I'm in some kind of unintelligible map in the Void falling millions of blocks a second. It almost looks and feels like that AI Minecraft demo that became a thing recently. It's disorienting, just falling in an infinite silent void. It's surreal bypassing the boundaries of this void. It has some unnerving quality to it. It's silent but somewhat calming. It's odd, and I valued this feeling. I'm happy I was able to bring this subject toward a light and make something of it.